We are back for season number 2 on the Talkback Show on the radio or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode number 18, created on August 31st, 2022. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota, and Neil out on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Hello, gentlemen. I'm having a gin and tonic, some Empress 1908 gin, and something very refreshing for a warm evening.
I'm having what is described as beer. Now, this is actually from Green Bay. It's a Stillmank. I think the label was designed by our friend Steve, but it's a Stillmank Brewery beer, an IPA, and also delicious.
And I am drinking a dark and stormy tonight, dark rum and ginger beer. All right, you can find us. Yes, you can find us on YouTube and Twitter at GreenBayChat and Facebook at the GBC podcast or GreenBayChat. And the audio, just the audio only, is available on Spotify and Anchor by searching for GreenBayChat. Well, it's been a while since we've been on the air. I know our fans, our subscribers to YouTube, we thank you for letting us know we haven't had a podcast for a while, but we are back. We're going to talk about the brand new Packer season, most notably the 53-man roster. Certainly, we've got a Packer player of the past, and there's some Packer history. We'll talk about maybe even undrafted free agents, and we'll even tell you where the hell we were all summer on the big road trip that we did. Right, Neil? We had a good time.
It was a good time, and you can see the preview of it here.
There's the picture that's posted, the three of us at a bar in Anchorage, Alaska, billed as a Packer bar, maybe a sports bar, but owned by a Packer fan. So there was some decent Packer memorabilia in there. And as I'm rambling, Jeff, the name of the place has already escaped me. What did we call that place?
The Crossroads.
The Crossroads.
Crossroads Lounge. That's what it is.
I'm going to say that any place that has a Reggie White jersey qualifies as a Packers bar. Let's just go with that.
It is.
So,
of the places that were listed as Packer bars in Anchorage.
Woo, that first one, John.
This one by far and away
was actually a Packer
all
bar.
Expectations. Yes, it was.
Yes. So just for this was Monday early afternoon day drinking. Just for context here.
With that noted, if you do check the Packers Everywhere website looking for a Packer bar in Anchorage, Alaska, the Panhandle Bar is not a Packers bar. It's not even a sports bar. I would call it a sports bar. According to the bartender who had just been there for 3 weeks, she says, well, I think we have football games on the TV on Sundays. And their TV was a 32-inch flat screen over on one.
Yeah, that was, that was culture.
It was day drinking at its best, Jeff.
Of the few folks that were in there, that was their sole purpose.
But the trip, we'll talk more about the trip at the end. So that's where we've been. We are back with it. The team is back with it. And the big news is that our preseason has completed. We're roughly, as of recording right now, 11 days away from kickoff on the brand new season in Minnesota. We'll talk more about that next week. But we're going to look at that 53-man roster as it fell into place yesterday, and then even a change today. We've got our practice.
John, I'm kind of surprised, given you being John, that you're not calling it the 69-man roster like Brian does.
I'm going to stick with what's on the script here, Neil. But the other big piece of that 53-man puzzle is all 11 draft picks made the final, or at least made the 53-man cut. I kind of felt like the seventh rounders might not have made it, or maybe Toure being the only one to make it. But surprisingly, all 4 of the 7th round draft picks, so all 11 rookies on that roster. Neil, you've got some thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, the bottom of the roster is always interesting. We spent a lot of time in consternation about, well, who's going to be the final cuts, who's going to make the team. And the fact is, most of these guys aren't going to do it anyway. And so Brian Gutekunst made the point that he was choosing his final players based on potential. And you talk about Ford, for example, as far as making the roster, somebody who has surprised a lot of people. I loved Samori Toure as a pick. Even though Juwan Winfrey had better numbers in the preseason, I love Samori Toure, but Gutekunst definitely choosing based on their potential. And if a guy's already been on the practice squad for a year and they're just barely making the roster, what's the point of keeping them on the roster for another year? And I agree with that approach. It's at a fundamental level. The only concern I have, of course, is that while Brian Gutekunst may think a little bit too highly of his picking skills, he's almost every draft pick that he has made the final roster. And with 4 7th-round picks all making the roster, there's a minor bit of concern that he thinks highly of himself. But to date, he's earned that privilege, and I'm happy to hope that continues.
I'll say that I'm not going to argue with any of that. I think that the 11 players, what they showed in the preseason, did come out showing better. Like you mentioned, Juwan Winfrey. Juwan Winfrey had a chance really to make his mark last season, and I think he failed at that. And then the preseason probably didn't show that he was heads and shoulders above Samori Toure and everyone else that was in that wide receiver room. And really, even if you say, well, maybe they were equal, or I think if they're equal, you go with the younger player. The ceiling is higher. The room for development is higher.
Toure just looked like he had a higher ceiling globally. I don't care what Winfrey's overall stats were. I wasn't inspired by Winfrey last year. I was very pleased to see Toure. Some of the plays that Toure made were really incredible. And whether he's going to pan out, I think is still an open question. Certainly, you never know with wide receivers at the end of the draft. But I feel a lot better about where the potential is and the ceiling is. And I think that's, where Gutekunst is going. And I absolutely agree with that let's go for the highest possible ceiling, especially for players who are not going to make a big difference unless they make a leap. I mean, the fact is Toure, as he is not going to be a difference maker for the Packers. If he's good enough, though, that he can take a step or two up in the year or two down the road, then he is somebody who can make a difference.
But 7 wide receivers and 4 tight ends kind of tells us the direction the offense is going. Jeff, with that said, only 2 running backs kept. By comparison, where you are in the Twin Cities, what'd they do in Minnesota with that running back room?
Well, it's a lot more crowded, certainly. But they had 2 quarterbacks on their roster, 5 running backs, 5 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends. So, and that obviously Justin Jefferson, he's the stud, the number 1. But yeah, 5 running backs. I'm like, okay, that's first-year regime. But remember who the quarterback is. So it's Kirk Cousins. So we'll see.
2 running backs though in Green Bay. I mean, we knew AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones were going to make the team.
Or is it 2.5?
Is it 2.5? Right? Because then the question was, who's going to be that third running back? Because you have 2 guys. Who say Taylor and Goodson? We'll leave it at that.
All right.
And they were fighting for that third spot. But Jeff, as we saw we watched that Kansas City game together, boy, all of a sudden they're running plays with Amari Rodgers out of the backfield.
Exactly.
And this is not foreign to the Packers offense, because for years Randall Cobb has done it, and before that, Ty Montgomery.
Yep.
So this is not something that is a foreign concept in Green Bay, but is it something that works?
Well,
I love Randall Cobb. I just don't feel that has ever worked with him out of the backfield. Now, Rodgers will have to wait and see.
Well, with the 2 Packer running backs, obviously you've got it's been used before, kind of the thunder and the lightning, right? So you've got Dillon, almost 250 pounds. He's quick, but he's a big dude. Then you've got, Aaron Jones, who's very different running style. So it's like, okay, but if you can get the defensive line moving, if they don't know what's going to hit them, if they're, focusing on the pass, if they can run, screen passes, obviously the Packers have always done really well with those, with a really, athletic offensive line, which we'll get to in a little bit, keep the defense guessing, keep them on roller skates or whatever you want to call it, keep them sliding around back there. And then the running game, if the passing game is kind of featured, then the running game might benefit.
Jeff, I want to go back to your point that you made about the Vikings. You said, well, they're choosing 5 running backs. It's a running back by committee. And I would argue that if you have anything by committee, that means you don't have anyone who's actually good. And is it possible that that's essentially what the Packers are doing at wide receiver? We really don't know, other than Allen Lazard, who is actually going to get the catches for the Packers this year. We're going to have to figure that out as the season goes along. Whereas we know that Quadzilla, we know that Aaron Jones are going to be able to push the ball
totally
forward
proven
and running.
commodities,
And so why worry about extra running backs? Let's keep those extra positions for the positions where we don't really know what's going to happen and let it play out as the season goes along. Since obviously the starters didn't play in the preseason, and we don't really know among all of those starters who's going to actually do anything this year.
Yeah, essentially you've got 11, well, including the running backs, you've got 13 receivers. Yeah, I think you're right. It's the shotgun approach or whatever. And I think based on what Rodgers has been, coaching on the field and telling him, he's going to throw and he's going to rely on people that he trusts. And I think that's going to separate pretty quickly who he trusts, because it's going to take one wrong route or a pick or something, and he's going to be like, okay, you're done.
Well, I mean, but do you there's a history of Rodgers with rookie receivers, but I mean, I have to assume that Christian Watson and Dubes are players that he is going to connect with eventually, even though it may not happen in the beginning. I suspect that the beginning of the year, we're going to see a lot of Randall Cobb and Alan Lazard and Sammy Watkins. But the fact is that those are different skill sets than what you have with a Watson or with a Dubes. And I just have a feeling that as we move into the season, our receiver mix is going to change pretty dramatically. And I say that despite that not being Aaron Rodgers' history.
You're right, though. I mean, there's great depth there. Even on the offensive line, the depth is nice too. The talk that was around today, if you saw it on Twitter, was the prospect of the two tackles, and that the two tackles were practicing, and it was implied there that that's Bakhtiari and Jenkins. And if you've got your bookend set in those two and Josh Myers at center, we're doing all right. I think you can take any two of the rest of the guys and put them at guard, and we'll be good to go. There's certainly a lot of depth there. The young guys, Zach Tom and Sean Ryan, showed that they can handle the spot. You've got Hansen and Newman from previously. So I think that the offensive line is what I'm really excited to see there as well. Neil, being the lineman, there's certainly something about the cohesiveness, being able to play together. And I know that during the preseason, they wanted like a 5-unit or a starting unit playing together, but that didn't include Bakhtiari and Jenkins. And now you're throwing those two in there. Is 10 days going to be enough to getting that unit of 5 working as one?
10 days is going to be enough if the people that you need to work in are veterans like Bakhtiari and Jenkins. Absolutely. I'm not concerned about the cohesiveness or cohesion within the line. I agree with John entirely. I think that, we've got a really incredible line. And I think that goes right back to the fact that we chose 2 running backs, and why that does not suggest what it might be guessed by an outside observer. I think that, the fact that we've got such a good line, and the fact that we've got 2 great running backs, is playing right into what Matt LaFleur's long-term plan has been. He wants to build a team that is going to be able to grind the ball in January. And he's got the line to do it. He's got the running backs that are going to do it. And even though so much of the focus has been on wide receivers and Rodgers, I think this is going to be the year where we really see the running game take off. We're going to see a Terrell Davis on the Denver Broncos in 97, carrying John Elway kind of thing. I think that is absolutely in play for the way that our year is going to play out. And I think that's what's the funniest thing about only having 2 running backs currently on the roster, is that it's basically that this is going to be the unit that, in my view, is going to carry the team.
Now, Neil, you threw another name out there when we talked about this 53-man roster. Can you believe they kept this old guy, this Aaron Rodgers, who's been around for 17 years now? This 38-year-old man is going to run. He's our savior. Are they serious about this?
Well, I think all of us are all in on Rodgers, so that's not really a big surprise.
The reigning MVP, NFL MVP. Yeah,
I would say my hope is that Rodgers does not get into the running too much. I really hope that this is not one of the every 4 years Rodgers is out for extended time because of an injury, and that's where it can come into play. And if Rodgers decides that he can't throw it to people and needs to run instead, I think that's when we've got the potential to get in trouble. I mean, that's obviously, if Rodgers is injured, Jordan Love has made strides. He certainly made progress as far as this offseason and the preseason is concerned. But I think it's going to be much more challenging to push for a title with Jordan Love for all of the obvious reasons. And so making sure that Aaron Rodgers does not get injured is certainly central as far as the season is concerned.
I think there's a nice security blanket there too. I mean, we went too many years worried about who the backup quarterback was. And you can argue what you want to argue about Jordan Love on where you think he is, if he could start somewhere else. I don't care. He's a backup quarterback in Green Bay, and he is a solid backup quarterback. And I feel a lot better with him there than Seneca Wallace or Scott Tolzien or Deshaun Kaiser or
John,
Oh,
you're
jeez.
Wow. You're trying,
Are these
you're
off
trying
the
to
top
hurt
of your
John.
head?
John is trying to hurt all of us right now. He's trying to hurt
So-
all of us and all of our listeners right now.
There's no problem with Jordan Love being the backup quarterback. He was throwing darts during preseason, and he is in the right spot at the right time. He will be fine where he is. We'll be fine with Aaron Rodgers for sure. How about defense, Neil?
So the defense obviously is viewed to be one of the strengths of our team, a very strong front seven. We've got a great secondary. Obviously, if you look at our top three cornerbacks, arguably we've got the top grouping of the top three quarterbacks as far as the NFL is concerned. And I feel very confident as far as that. I am a little bit concerned about our depth in the secondary. I think if I'm going to have any questions about anything, it's, well, what if somebody gets injured? We had long periods without Jair last year and Rasul Douglas stepped up. But, you really, in the current NFL, you need to have 5 good D-backs. And I think we've got 5 really, really, really good defensive backs right now. And as long as they stay healthy, I think we are in an incredible position as far as the defense is concerned. We've got good rotation on the line. We've added a lot of speed as far as the linebacker, obviously Devondre Campbell, and then throwing in a Kai Walker and things like that. I mean, this is a unit that is set up to potentially be number 1 in the NFL as far as the defense is concerned. And that goes right back to my point that we don't need to have our passing game going at the beginning. We don't even need to be going at full speed by the middle of the season, because we're going to have a strong defense. We're going to have a strong running game. We've got a great line. We've got the tools to make it throughout the season and let the wide receivers figure it out. Our wide receivers figure it out. We've got a Super Bowl run and play.
Well, and I think also what factors in is because our bye week is so late this year, like really late in December. It's going to
11th,
be,
yeah.
with the younger players, in theory, fresher legs, things like that. If defense can carry along, yeah, I think that will help the offense as well. Definitely.
And Swagger is part of it too. I mean, this is a defense. I think they've, maybe to their detriment, they read their press clippings. They know that they're being talked about. I mean, they when you're good, but it depends on when that swagger becomes arrogance. If they can,
Right.
if they can maintain the swagger, if they can
Yep.
maintain that dominance, I think that's something that we've been missing in Green Bay in the defense for quite a while. Is not just a dominant player, but speed all the way around.
Yeah.
And I think they truly addressed that speed issue with Quay Walker coming in with our defensive backfield. Devondre Campbell showed it last year that having someone fast in that middle spot. So certainly that's something I'm looking forward to, is just seeing guys that move fast. Rashawn Gary, is probably going to be all over the place this year with his speed as well. I mean, I think that a lot of times the last couple of years, he looked like he was just hanging out in second gear, or like that he had a tether on him, that they weren't letting him go all out just for fear of over pursuing and things like that. So if he's ready to go, if he's under control and disciplined, it's going to be a tough defense. It's really going to be tough.
Well, especially
this is the great thing, right? I mean, we've got the tools right now to win 14-10 games, to win 17-14 games. I wasn't quite so confident of that being the case in a lot of the previous years.
But here's the other thing. If the offense starts to gel, or when it starts to gel, hopefully, if the defense is always playing with a lead, then that plays into our hand as well. And that's when that's when the Packers have had problems in the past. If the offense has to catch up because the defense has given up a bunch of cheap scores or whatever. If the offense goes out to a lead, I mean, it's not a guaranteed win, but it certainly helps.
But I would go the other way. Let's think about, for example, that disaster of a season opener we had last year in New Orleans, where both the defense and the special teams and the offense all played their part. I just don't think that there's going to be a situation with the defense we have this year that we're going to fall far enough behind that it's going to be a problem, right? So, we have a receiver turns the wrong direction. We have an interception that occurs, and it ends up being a pick six. We're not going to fall 14, 21 points behind early. And we know that Rodgers is able to come back if they're only 7 points down, 10 points down. And so the defense is going to hold us close enough that we'll be in a position to take advantage at the end of the game, even if we're not at our sharpest on offense.
And you mentioned the special teams. Hopefully special teams doesn't cause a loss.
Have they earned their name of special teams yet, or are they still the ass
They are
hats?
very special. That is for sure.
They
didn't
still
really
the
show
ass
anything.
They're still the ass hats.
They didn't really
Jeff
show
said,
anything.
they're the ass hats until proven otherwise.
Yeah, and they didn't show anything in the preseason to help. But to Brian Gutekunst's credit, always looking to make the team better, picked up Rudy Ford, who was let go by Jacksonville, who is a huge special teams player. Now, that unfortunately didn't bode well for Micah Abernathy, who really worked his ass off to get onto this roster. He was in the USFL. He came in as a camp body, worked his way up to, holy cow, this guy's making the cut. But they'll bring him back most likely in the practice squad, and he's a feel-good story. He could have been the undrafted free agent we wanted to talk about to make our transition to what we're going to next. But just to say, hey, we're always looking. You know, the Packers were 28th on the list of waivers. We don't know if they put bids in on anyone. They didn't pick anyone up, but then suddenly Rudy Ford became available, and they grabbed him. So it was able to get someone who, like I said, they're always looking to make the team better, and it was nice to see that.
And Rudy Ford also adds that depth in the secondary that I was so concerned about. And did you want to rely on Tariq Carpenter as far as your safety coming in when somebody goes down with an injury? No, not yet. Hopefully in the future. But Rudy Ford is somebody absolutely I feel comfortable with coming in off the bench.
Right. So there's definitely years of experience there over what Carpenter or Abernathy had. Yes.
Quick little aside. That's not his real name, Rudy.
It's Jonathan.
It is.
Yeah. So
yes,
there's
do we have two Jonathan Fords?
Two Jonathan Fords on the team. And both on defense even. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So his nickname was Rudy based on the Rudy movie, the Rudy character.
Nice. Well, enough talking about our Packer players of the present, and we kind of keyed in on our undrafted free agents. We're going to go to our Packer player of the past.
All right. So in thinking about this week's Packers player of the past, I'm thinking about, what happens when you have the cut down to the 53-man roster? And certainly you're always sort of thinking about, what undrafted free agent has a chance of making the roster? And as Packers fans, we've been really lucky to have some really good undrafted free agents. And this week's Packers player of the past is Sam Shields. Sam Shields was an undrafted free agent in 2010. Why was he an undrafted free agent? So he did his college at University of Miami. In high school, he was a wide receiver. He was actually ranked number 17 in the country as wide receivers coming out of high school. Won a state title in high school in the 4x100. At Miami, he started out as a really strong wide receiver. He was a freshman All-American honorable mention. But as his career at Miami went along, the wide receiver role dropped off. His junior year, he was special teams player of the year. But in his senior year, he switched to cornerback. And in a Miami team as the senior year, he was voted the most improved player on the defense his senior year. Now, most improved player is not something you usually expect for somebody who's going to be an NFL star. And so he was in a transitioning period as far as his senior year. And so he was thought that maybe he might be a 7th-round draft pick, but he ended up going undrafted. But he certainly had the physical skills. He had a 4.30-40 time, despite, a 5'11", 180 size. But he's somebody who certainly had speed. And so the Packers, along with other teams, tried to take a flyer on him. And he certainly proved himself within the offseason and within the preseason. And by the end of the preseason, he was the number 3 cornerback on the roster behind Charles Woodson and Tramon Williams. So he moved himself up pretty dramatically from starting out as an undrafted free agent. And he actually started the first game of the season in 2010. So not only being an undrafted free agent, but going on to being a starter. And certainly he's a player that made a number of very big plays throughout his Packers career. And I'm just going to focus on 3 games as far as, where Sam Shields was somebody who was an absolute difference maker. And the first is in the NFC championship game in 2010 against the Bears. And so certainly we think about that 2010 championship game. We think about the interception from BJ Raji, but Sam Shields had 2 interceptions and a strip sack of Jay Cutler within that game. And that final interception in that NFC Championship game is what sealed the game for the Packers with under a minute left. He had 2 interceptions in that game, both of them in critical positions when the Bears were in Packers territory. When you only win a game by 7 points, that's kind of a big deal. Certainly I refer to Tramon Williams as Tramon motherfucking Williams because of his role in those 2010 playoffs. I think that I need to reevaluate and call Sam motherfucking Shields for his role in that Bears NFC Championship game. He also had a critical role as far as Packers history in the Golden Tate Fail Mary. He was actually the player that was pushed down by Golden Tate in the Fail Mary game. And finally, if we go to one of the most painful Packers playoff games ever, the Colin Kaepernick game, it's easy to remember just how dismal that game was, but it started out with the first San Francisco play being a Sam Shields pick 6. The Packers were ahead 7-0 early in that game because of a Sam Shields 52-yard interception reception. And Sam Shields actually had a second interception within the Colin Kaepernick game. And so there are a lot of things to forget, and many of us have forgotten about. A lot of help as far as forgetting about the Colin Kaepernick game, but Sam Shields absolutely stepped up within the Colin Kaepernick game. And so he's a player that is certainly worthy of being revered as far as Packers history. I think the only regret that we Packers fans and Sam has is that his career was certainly shortened because of concussions. He had 4 concussions in his time on the Packers. He ended up leaving the Packers after the 2016 season because of concussions in that season. He ended up only playing 1 game in 2016 and ended up only playing 1 year after that when he played for the Rams. But a player that was absolutely critical as far as our 2010 Super Bowl 45 run. And Sam Shields, undrafted free agent to star of the playoffs and star of a run that won a Super Bowl.
I think the big moment for me for Sam Shields was when he showed off his not only that 4.3 speed, but his acceleration, his ability to catch up that interception in Dallas, where he was beat off the line and then within 10 yards down the field is intercepting the quick slant over the middle. I think it was off of the hands of one Tony Romo, and got the ball back in Packer hands in that game. And that's one of those things that stays in my mind, where Shields really showed how incredible he was in the position that he played. An undrafted free agent who had a breakthrough with Green Bay, showing what he could do. And what we also want to talk about, we'll make that, how'd you like that transition, Neil? I saw you smile. We're going to talk about, we talked about our 53-man roster, and now we're going to take a look at who we like on that roster. So last year, if you talk about a breakthrough player, Devondre Campbell came into Green Bay and just started showing off as a inside linebacker, and became a Pro Bowler, All-Pro in that position as well. Who do you like to kind of do the same this year, to say, hey, I'm taking this step up and I'm going to be the guy at my position that people are going to take a look at and get his name known around the league? Neil, who do you like in that spot?
So we've talked about the defense and how we think the defense is going to likely carry the team and be a star for the team. And for me, Eric Stokes showed parts of that last year. I think Eric Stokes this year takes the step to being a bona fide contender for All-Pro positioning. I think that he's got the physical skills, he's got the people around him, he's got that core of the defense. And I think that this is the year that Eric Stokes becomes Eric Stokes that's known not just in Packerland, but known throughout the NFL.
Jeff, who's your guy?
I'm going to go with, I'm going to go on the offensive side. So I would say when we initially talked about this, I starting to come up with somebody that could, that was going to make a difference. And perhaps my initial choices might've been somebody that has already made a difference. So kind of looked a little closer and looked to the big uglies on the offensive line. So I chose one Jon Runyan. Why did I choose him? So for the last 2 years, he's been extremely good on the offensive line as a guard. So what is it going to take for him to get to the next step? Well, he's had lots and lots of reps. So out of the 17 games last year, he started actually, he started 16 of the 17 games. But what's really fascinating about this, on the offensive line, with all the changes that happened, with, of course, Bakhtiari being out pretty much, well, for all intents and purposes all year, Jon Runyan did not commit a penalty on the season. in over 800 snaps, he didn't have an offensive penalty. So he's only one of 4 offensive linemen in the NFL to play an 800 plus snaps and not be penalized. Pretty impressive. So what does this mean? He's seasoned, he's good, he's big, he knows the team, he knows the line, he can provide, he can be played pretty much across the line wherever if there are injuries. But this is part of what we talked about earlier with kind of that offensive line gelling. If they can, there may be some injuries, hopefully not, but if there are, it's kind of a plug and play. And I'd like to see him be an all-pro, step up and dominate this year.
I think the offensive line as a whole, and we talked about it earlier, they're already talking about our 2 tackles, our bookends in Bakhtiari and Jenkins. And I like the anchor right in the middle. I like Josh Myers. He was a 2nd-round draft pick last year. Of the 6 games that he was not injured, he started in all 6 of those last year. He proved that he could play center. He proved that the Packers scouting department knows how to find centers out of Ohio State behind Corey Linsley and now Josh Myers, who is ready to go, ready to start as a rookie. And if he is healthy, he will be an anchor. He will be in that same vein as Corey Linsley, as someone who's going to be in that Pro Bowl talking and potential all-pro positioning as well. But even having someone solid like that in the middle there, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter who they put at guards, but now you do have Runyon and Royce Newman and a couple of rookies that can go into those guard spots. They can all cover for each other in other spots as well, which is nice because we never know what injuries are going to do to us. But I like Josh Myers as a breakthrough player this year, someone who's going to be carrying that offensive line as well all the way through.
I like that I tricked both of the non-linemen in order to pick linemen. We had our group chat about this, and I was very circumspect. And thank you, gentlemen. Because I would have chosen both of those men if you hadn't. So
well, but I had my pick before you say anything because a quarterback knows how to appreciate a center, and having someone who can keep your hands warm and be in front of you all game long. It's a good thing to have someone you can trust right in front of you. And I think Rodgers has that in Josh Myers. So we have that we're looking forward to for the season. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit on not only what we're looking for in the team, but also on the show in the season. We'll also tell you where we've been this past summer. But before that, Jeff, you've got a bedtime story for us.
Yeah. So, with
so enthusiastic about where we're going with this.
Well, we talked about this, some history, bedtime stories have been really positive. And, this one, well, it's not all decisions are made correctly. So, as we over the last couple of days, we've watched all teams scramble and to try to get down to the 53-man roster. And so we chatted about this a little bit, and we said, okay, who have the Packers let go that, during these cutdowns that really turned out to be a gigantic mistake. So I've got one name that puts, unfortunately puts shivers down many Packer fans' spines. One Mike Sherman. So I'll take you on a trip down amnesia lane back to 2003 and 2004. This is when Mike was kind of running the show. He was head coach, he was GM, and he was very much responsible for the draft picks. And he had a great staff around him, but he didn't really listen to his scouts. Well, it wasn't pretty. We've got a couple defensive tackles, Kenny Peterson, James Lee, a guy by the name of Hunter Hillenmeyer. I'll get to him in just a moment. We've got Chris Johnson, a cornerback, another defensive tackle, Donnell Washington, and a certain punter by the name of William Herbert Sander, aka BJ Sander. So all of these picks over the course of 2003 and 2004, most of them were high picks, 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round. There was one 7th round pick. But what was bizarre about this is, so this is kind of the opposite problem, kind of that we had, or I would say problem, but kind of what we talked about earlier with Gutekunst, right? So all 11 draft picks made this year. That really wasn't the case in 2003 and 2004. Not necessarily because the players were not good or even good fits with the Packers, it was kind of the talent evaluation. They picked him, and then they didn't make the team, and they cut him. And unfortunately, they made other teams, and they were good on other teams. So, and some of the guys they hung on to, like one William Herbert Sander, really sucked. So as a punter, a little bit about this gentleman. So they picked him in the 3rd round. Okay. Nobody picks a punter in the 3rd round. This just doesn't happen. So the Packers were kind of duped. That's kind of the Packer lore, and that there was another team that was looking at picking this guy. Now, on paper or in theory, he was good for a year. He was the Ray Guy in 2003, the Ray Guy punter of the year. Okay, great. In college, he was awful. He was truly bad. And so, but what was terrible about this is, and when the front office isn't really paying attention or really on their A game, is that the Packers in 2004 carried 2 punters for the whole season. Okay. So BJ Sander took up a roster spot on the 53-man roster, but was inactive for all 16 games. That doesn't seem like a good use of resources. A veteran replaced him. He punted. So BJ Sanders' career, after being on the active roster all of 2004, lasted a total of 64 punts. So quickly back to one Hunter Hillermeyer. So he was a 5th-round draft choice in 2003, and Hunter made it on the opening day roster, and he was cut 3 days after the 2003 season opener. And he did not clear waivers, and he ended up being picked up 3 days later by the Bears. Well, that turned out pretty well for the Bears. He played 8 seasons with Chicago, started 69 regular season games, and a Super Bowl. So not one of our finer moments, and not all talent evaluation. And we've talked about drafts and things like that. But even, as you get into the season, as you get down the cutdowns, who knows? So maybe, Rudy Ford that we picked up, is going to work out just great, whether it's on special teams or whatever. And we chatted a little bit about, before we went on, about, other teams in that have picked up a lot of waiver wire players and things like that. Is this wise? Is this, who knows? We'll find out. But it's an art and a science, and we'll see what happens this year.
Well, in Green Bay, letting Ty Summers go, let him go early so he could catch on, and he does end up in Jacksonville as well. Now, Ty could, maybe he does have a nice career in Jacksonville like Hunter Hillenmeyer had in Chicago, but at least it's not at the expense of keeping 2 punters. So, the move for him was the fact that he just didn't fit on the depth chart, and they were moving faster and younger. Yep. And that's certainly, it's a different time. We've got a different GM, and that's all good. Yep. Certainly when we look at, like you said, Jeff, some of these stories of the past, sometimes we use rose-colored glasses. Sometimes we just, look at that and say, hey, that's a shit sandwich. Let's eat it up, I guess, because we have nothing else we can do with it. And that's one of those. Yeah. So that's a saga that is best left forgotten. So thanks for being brief on it, Jeff. Let's move on, because we've got big plans for the season. We'll still have one more show before the season opener on September 11th in Minnesota. Next week, we're going to give you our prognostications, because what would a Packers podcast or any sports podcast be without predicting the season, rather futilely trying to predict 18 weeks into the future of what could happen despite injuries.
We're predicting the playoffs too. We're doing
picking
the
whole playoffs, the Super Bowl.
We're going to be as dumb as we possibly can be.
We are going to do it all, because that's what podcasters do, Neil. And yes, we're going to be as dumb as we can be.
Glutton for punishment.
And we'll talk about what we're going to do this season. We've got big things on the horizon that we want to go to Buffalo. We're in the works of a trip there. Our friend Dave is going to come with us, and we're going to head to Buffalo this year at the end of October. I'll probably even next week talk more about tailgating at Lambeau Field, because you're going to need to know what you want to do when Bears weekend rolls around, because lot 1 is closed and we're over in lot 9. We'll tell you how that went. But let's talk about this summer. We took some time off, and Neil had this crazy idea that he wanted to drive to Alaska and to the Arctic Ocean and all across Canada. And he put over 13,000 miles on his Jeep Patriot, and Jeff and I joined him. in various parts of it. But that's what we did this summer. Neil, what now that you've done it, did it meet all of your expectations when you planned this thing a couple of years ago?
So this was a plan that came right at the core of March 2020 and COVID, and when I just wanted to get out as far away as I possibly could. And in the end, it evolved into going a sea to sea to sea, going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean to the Arctic Ocean. And other than the fishing being washed out by late, everything running late and the water being too high, it was absolutely what I wanted it to be. It was, 4 weeks that I hung out with friends. We hung out in the wilderness. We climbed mountains. We swam in cold oceans.
So lots of snow-capped mountains.
There were a lot of snow. Yeah, that was the running joke of the trip, was snow-capped mountains. And the Jeep did the job as far as getting us up there. John took us on some very rugged roads. We abused the Jeep appropriately. We used the Jeep.
You got mud on the roof, which was a goal that you needed to have.
Mud on the roof, mud on the inside of the hood. Yep. That mud will always be on the inside of the hood. The key was going on the Dempster Highway, which is 550 miles of, at best, gravel road, many places crushed shale. John went the first attempt at it. The ferries did not cooperate with John, but we went up to the Arctic Ocean and put our feet in the Arctic Ocean. And that was unforgettable as far as just what the landscape was up there, but also just, the people that were up there. I loved the town of Tuk, or Tuktoyaktuk. The people there were incredible, but the people that we met on the way was a central part of what the trip was. And we have lots of stories, and the fact of the matter is that this podcast, or this episode of the podcast, is not where we're going to go through them. We'll do a special episode on the trip, but I loved everything of the trip. And my two companions, John on the first half and Jeff on the second half, were obviously central to this trip being such a success for us.
And I need to apologize because I totally had the Canadian accent wrong when we did the preview episode. But by the time we got to Dawson City, Neil, in the Yukon, I would say I had it down pretty well. And then we met our innkeeper, Yuli, who is originally from Switzerland. So he spoke the Canadian accent with a little Swiss accent thrown in. And that was a thing of beauty. To listen to Yuli talk was just great. We sat and had drinks with our innkeeper one of the nights that we were in Dawson City. And that was a special thing. But yeah, I don't think I can, I got to think about it to try to get that Scotch, Irish, English, French,
Canadian.
John was absolutely, let me just say, but John was absolutely on point with this Canadian accent, to the point that was really, really annoying when you're driving. It was very annoying. But absolutely on point.
Yep. And we got to speak French as well, Neil. We ran into a couple who originally from France, were in Canada touring at the time, and Neil definitely speaks French a lot better than I do, but I struggled with it. I had fun with it, and got to, because their English was way better than my French, that's for sure.
No, it was the people, of course, is what travel is really about. And yeah, it was all of the different people we met, in addition to these two assholes that I traveled with the whole way. So.
Well, at least you speak highly of us. That's
yeah, you got that going for you. We made it back in one piece, barely.
And continued the podcast afterwards. Even, I mean, that was the question that you talk about the Barbs. What were the concerns about the Barbs? Like, well, you're never going to podcast again because you'll hate each other after this trip, and well, it survived.
we're still talking. We made it after.
We had the goal of doing a podcast from North Pole, Alaska. Yep. For the Moose Creek Lodge that, in North Pole, we talked about during college. We had very high hopes of going there until we got there and we found out, it was a COVID closure. It had been closed for a year. Neil and I went over and still took a forlorn photo in front of the place and in front of their sign just to say that we were there, but it is not anywhere near the Packer Bar that it was. It was certainly under renovations. So I hope it works out for them. But yeah, that was one of those things where, hey, we had a great plan, but it just did not work out for us.
Well, and that's all what travel is all about, right? You have plans-ish until you don't. And so that there was a lot of, as I like to say, that I think, Neil, what we encountered, at least you and I, we were very fortunate. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And I think we were very lucky in some aspects, Whereas what we didn't encounter, no flats.
Our tires survived the entire trip, whereas we met people who had 7 flats and couldn't make it up to the Arctic Ocean.
But there's a
because
little
of the
karma
flats.
involved there too, with learning how to repair a puncture and things like that, and being available to help them and things like that. So I think that when your karma is good and you're careful and things were well planned, that generally luck favors the prepared, right? So even at the very end when things were making noise, we still made it back. So overall it was a once in a lifetime experience. So it was the many pictures that were taken and the experiences and things like that. It was certainly fun. Certainly a blast.
And we didn't have to use our bear spray at all, which was nice.
Yes.
We saw a lot of
Jeff was ready to put it all over himself, but we told him not to.
Easy.
He survived. So
we did see plenty of wildlife. We saw quite a few bears, saw some black bears and grizzly bears, and but moose. We saw them from a distance. Yeah, and these were not.
The moose was maybe not from as much of a distance as it could have been. One of the meese, at least.
Right. Yeah. The one. Yeah. Yeah. I have a picture of Neil taking a picture of the moose, where both Neil and the moose are in the picture, and that turned out because that's how close we were. But also, I had the car and gear ready to go at the same time. But yeah, I mean, these animals were not zoo animals. These were true wild animals that we saw. Lots of wildlife in Canada. Canada was just so beautiful. Wonderful trip. And any place that we stopped at, I could see spending a week in Banff, a week in Jasper, a week in Dawson City, as long as it's not winter. Yeah, I'll go there.
Big caveat there. Big caveat.
By the way, Megan has spent a week in Dawson City in winter, and she thinks it's perfectly fine. So
right, yep. Or even a week in Fairbanks or a week in Anchorage. Again, any of them would be spectacular destinations.
Yeah, I probably won't be going on the Dempster Highway to the Arctic Ocean again, though. I think once was enough. I don't know, Neil, how you feel about that, but it was the thing that was kind of cool is that, and I just want to give a shout out too, that we were there on Father's Day, and so as we're literally in Tuck at the top of the world, the end of the road at the Arctic Ocean, and there was cell phone service, and so. Neil called his dad.
There was three out of 550 miles of the Dempster Highway that had cell service, but yeah.
Yes. But you called your dad. So that was pretty cool. One, that we had cell phone service, but two, the fact that you were able to call call and talk to your dad. And so that was, I know that meant a lot based on the trip, because that was kind of the impetus of the trip anyway.
The original plan was actually to go up to the Mackenzie River Delta with my dad, because my dad has had this obsession since the early 1980s with the Mackenzie River Delta. And certainly my dad's interest in that wildlife in that unspoiled area certainly sparked my interest as far as why I wanted to go there. It wasn't just a destination thing. It's that my dad has thought about this a lot, and unfortunately he couldn't join us for this trip, but
that's why that was
certainly incredibly meaningful. Yeah, my father, after he hung up the phone, or after we hung up the phone from our 3 minutes of talking up there, it was, how many fathers can say their son called them from the Arctic Ocean?
Yep.
It was a good trip, and maybe we'll do an anniversary trip, 10 years down the road. We'll maybe if they make some improvements to the Dempster Highway, we'll take that drive again.
I have no problems doing the Dempster Highway again. That was part of the challenge, right? If it were easy, anyone could do it.
True.
And honestly, this was, so the Dempster Highway was murder on tires. It was murders on axles. If you didn't pay attention, you were going to end up in the water. We saw Jeeps that were in the water. We saw vehicles that were completely shredded by the highway. But what was amazing to me, and we saw this especially on the drive back, is how many motorcycles wanted to do
Yep.
the Dempster Highway. This is an obsession among people who are motorcyclists, among bikers, and that takes a special level of dedication to want to be able to do that. You know, they had full body armor on. They had to be planned at a level that was way beyond something that, you know, we had as far as our Jeep was
Yeah.
concerned. And I was really inspired by the dedication and motivation of the bikers going up the Dempster Highway into the Arctic.
Yeah. They were great. I mean, just talking with them, you know, it was a kind of a camaraderie, because you don't end up there by accident. I mean, it is a very intentional place to go, and based on what you have to endure, basically. I mean, you know, it's otherworldly. And so as part of that, you know, I don't know how many people have ever been up there. It can't be a very large number. But it's something that was unforgettable.
And you can say you did it.
And I can say that I did it.
All right, gentlemen, as we make the big transition from the preseason to the regular season, and we are looking ahead or taking a look back, any final thoughts on this episode?
My final thought is that we're now 10 days away from the regular season. And so let's go and let's have a great season. And then I finally want to conclude this Alaska adventure component by thanking my two co-drivers. I really cannot say enough for how much I appreciated both of you taking the time out to go on this long drive. And there was a lot of the drive that was just long and tedious. That, you know, the highlight,
cloudy and rainy.
The highlight photos are great, but it's the time that I spent with these guys that really made the trip. And, you know, all the things I saw was really secondary to core level. Thank you, Jed. Thank you, Jeff.
Well, you're welcome, Neil. It was a blast.
Yeah, it was.
Jeff, anything on the season?
I'm looking forward to it. I think we'll have a spirited podcast next week. I think, you know, we're going to pick our MVPs, our, you know, divisions. We're going to kind of prognosticate, and then we're going to look back over the course of the season and go, what the hell were we thinking? So
right. It's a good thing we'll record it, we'll write it down, and we'll make
that's
fun of
right.
each other.
And it'll come back to haunt us every
January
single week. So looking forward to that. I think next week will be spirited. It'll be fun, and looking forward to the to real football, the season opener, and basically 3 solid months of football.
All right. I concur on both of you. There we go. Nothing new to add for me as well. All right. Get information on the GBC podcast at GreenBayChat on Twitter and on Facebook at the GBC podcast GreenBayChat. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.